glass and that data is going up into the cloud, so we're videoing everything we see. Secondly, historically our allies have been the Five Eyes, these sorts of people. In the future, geopolitical things are changing, economies are changing, we're tilting more towards Asia, and should we not be thinking about rethinking who our friends are? And I'm not saying you're not our friend and you're going to be our friend, but more, you're also our friend.
Okay, thanks. We started that discussion, I think you were halfway through it when you came in. Richard?
Yeah, kia ora, Richard Orziki's my name. I'm just speaking as a New Zealand citizen. I support the idea that the country needs to be protected, and we need processes and things in place to do that. I know we spoke about Dotcom, but I think when things go wrong, which they did do with and on the basis of terrorism, with the errors, and a lot of that community were horribly affected by the actions of the police and supposedly the interests of our country. So when it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. And the aftermath of going horribly wrong is that there are issues in communities where the trust that the gentleman spoke about before is just heightened to a larger degree, that with all the good intentions to do things, if we get it wrong, then basically the repercussions are huge for trust and for support for other initiatives to put in place.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to make a comment? Yes, we've got one back there. No, we haven't. Sorry, he was just standing up. Okay, so that's a useful set of discussions. I think I'm going to invite each of the panel members to talk generally and respond to whichever bits they feel is most appropriate to respond to. But I think I would just sort of preface that by saying I think there's a relationship. I mean, clearly there's been a breakdown of trust as a result of a lot of the activities that have taken place. Media beat up or not, there's been a breakdown of trust. I think the relationship between trust, the pace with which legislation is being pushed through, and the ongoing oversight, I think there's something in there that says if we push stuff through and we don't have the right oversight, then we're never going to be able to rebuild that trust. And it seems to me trust between the people of New Zealand and their security agencies is an important thing to try and maintain. So that would be my view, and I think I've got general consensus from what the people have said here. So I'd like to invite each of the panelists one by one to make some comments that respond to whatever resonated in terms of what the audience said, and in particular, what specific areas do you think we should have attention to in order to rebuild trust and strengthen oversight? And Paul, I'll start with you.
I do find it rather remarkable in the years that I've lived here, the erosion of trust in the intelligence agencies. I got here in the mid-90s, and it was assumed they operated on our behalf and in good faith, and look where we are today. And I hate to say it, but we have to give Mr. Dotcom a lot of thanks, because he's exposed some weaknesses in the system, regardless of the merits of his case. And that's allowing us here and elsewhere to reflect on exactly what our role is in the Western intelligence community and the like, and where are the limits of domestic surveillance. And so that much is good. I should point out that in a former life, I remember an American intelligence officer saying to me, ambiguity leads to confusion, but confusion can lead to opportunity. For those in the middle of a confused state can take advantage of that confused state to advance their own goals. And we should be aware that that can happen inside the intelligence community, not because people are rogue or dark-spirited, but being fully loyal, fully interested in what they perceive to be the national interest. Sometimes people will take advantage of the gray areas in legislation and the like to pursue agendas that may have to do with alliance building, may have to do with career promotion, but at the end of the day do not have as much to do with the national interest as they make it out to be. And I say that because that's why we need to define things in black and white. What the GCSB can do, what are the limits it can do. I mean, mind you, I would go and many people, again, I'm sort of struck by what people don't know. The SIS has domestic espionage on its agenda, it has foreign human intelligence collected on its agenda, and it has counterintelligence on its agenda. I think you can do one or two of those things pretty well. I don't think you can do all three of them well, and that's just the SIS, and of course, everybody knows about the SIS. So I think that, it may be time to start defining in black and white exactly what each of these agencies is responsible for doing, and don't leave the gray area where ambiguity can arise. And I would start with this. What are threats to national security? Are they physical threats? Are they economic threats? I mean, I think we need to have a debate. I personally believe that intelligence agencies should deal with clear and present physical threats to the physical integrity of the country. Domestic intelligence that is crime fighting and the like should be left to the police. Obviously, you have Interpol, you do have liaison between intelligence agencies and the police when it comes to transnationalized crime. Think of the intersection of arms smugglers, drug smugglers, people smugglers, and terrorists. And there may be some reason to overlap. But right now in New Zealand, I think we're very confused about what are threats to national security. I think we're very confused about what national security means anymore. And I think that's actually something that we should debate. Anyway, final point, because I heard something about how to renegotiate at echelon. And I should point out, there was a very good point. You realize, of course, that we give away 90% of our private details in open source, Facebook and the like. And intelligence agencies do more open source intelligence gathering than they do anything classified. So they're already mining you. If you're on social media, if they have an interest in you. I mean, they're too busy doing, bigger things than to be looking at me. But the hard fact is that public source information is the mainstream of intelligence collection and analysis in this day and age. The classified stuff is actually not as important as the open source stuff. Now, with regards to redefining the terms with echelon, very good point, because it is a watershed moment if we do that. But, for example, we've tied ourselves back to the United States with the Washington and Wellington consensus. I quite frankly don't think that was a good idea, given that our trade relationships are increasingly dependent on Asia, and at least one of those Asian countries is a major rival to the United States. And I don't think straddling that fence is going to work out well over the long term. At some point, push is going to come to shove, and we're going to have to make a choice. It's not going to be comfortable. But here's the interesting thing. I think that it is possible, although difficult, for us to say, look, we don't have a dog in certain fights. And so we would prefer not to engage in espionage on behalf of the United States or the UK who are involved in such fights. Now, it's a very delicate diplomatic and alliance issue to turn to an ally and say, you know what, I think I'm going to pass on that one because I sort of get along with those guys. You don't, but I have no quarrel with them, and so why don't you leave that off my mission list and point me in a different direction where I can be of help, because this one poses too much of a thorny problem for me, both internationally and domestically, given that my interests are variegated and spread out in ways that do not entirely overlap with yours. That might be a point of departure. Again, it would be very difficult to refuse any request to look at something on the part of our bigger allies, but on the other hand, particularly if there's a large public debate in New Zealand about what we should or should not be doing, this may be an opportune moment to say, you know, there are a few things we'd prefer not to do given our vulnerabilities as a trade-dependent nation. And finally, someone said to me when I was saying in private that I thought we should stay in echelon, said, you know what we should do? We should declare neutrality and basically declare ourselves to be neutral and take on all comers as a result. And I didn't like the idea, but it stuck with me. I'm not a fan of that idea, but I think, again, I'm not a native-born New Zealander. But it stuck with me. Could New Zealand move to a more neutral status so that it could reconcile the differences between the PRC and the US? Because that strategic competition is going to heat up. It's not going to cool down. And we're sort of the meat in that sandwich. You know, our trade relationship, again, we have the first bilateral la-da-la with China, and we're first-tier security partners of the United States. I don't know, I don't see that as tenable, so maybe neutrality is the best alternative.
Thanks, Paul. Ian, general findings, summing up comments.
I think one of the questions or statements that sort of rang true for me was the one around trust. And my blood pressure sort of started to increase with a few of the other statements. And I guess it might be a naive place to be to think that we can control some of this. But we're not given the information that allows us to not be naive. What we're told is there are all these things that we are to be protected from, just trust us. And then that trust is broken and eroded. So there's some work there for the state to figure that out. That's the first thing. The thing that annoys me too is that globally it's not okay to create a surveillance state, an international surveillance state. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's acceptable. I don't want people going through my stuff. It's my stuff. I understand you have to police it. I understand that there are things that you have to do. But you need to be transparent and you need to be monitored and you need to understand that we are going about our daily lives and we do have a right to privacy. We also have a right to give away that privacy for free things, Facebook as an example. I don't agree with the nothing to hide argument that you hear every now and again. If we had nothing to hide, if you've got nothing to hide out there, then can I have a copy of your credit card? I promise I'll look after it. So for me, there's this frustration, and what that turns into from a technologist point of view and from a citizen point of view is then I'm going to protect my stuff. I'm going to lock my front door. I'm going to buy a burglar alarm. I'm going to encrypt everything that I do. Not because I have something to hide, but because it's mine. So wherever the debate goes from here, and it's obviously highly complex, there has to be more discussion about it. There's not enough understanding. Rushing these kind of laws through will leave a sour taste and further erode that trust that the New Zealand citizen is already under threat. So yeah, it's emotional, I think, at the end of the day, but it's our stuff, it's our privacy, it's our country. We can't see what they're up to. That's the fundamental thing. So there's this perception versus reality. We don't know what the reality is. So yeah, we might be naive. We're a small country. We communicate well, we have strong communities, we have a burgeoning ICT industry. We don't like to be told what to do. It's in our culture and our DNA. So given that, I think as far as the law goes, my preference would be for it to stop, for some kind of inquiry to be carried out, for it to be restarted, and I agree with the good doctor. I think that we need to understand what it is as a country that threatens us and then debate that openly in forums like this, in forums like Select Committee. So my hope is that there's somewhere on a continuum of targeted spying that's necessary and that move towards a global surveillance state that we don't want to go down that path. We don't want to head towards 1984, and it feels like that. That might not be the reality, but it feels like that. We have to have more discussion.
Very good. Thanks, Ian. Sir Bruce.
There's been very good points made in the last two speakers, and I generally don't have any difficulty with any of them. Coming back to the law, which Ian basically finished on, that's why I said we have to have more debate on this. We have to make certain that the overwatch of our intelligence organisations is robust, is thorough, is independent and is totally apolitical. I think that we first and foremost have to do that. The New Zealand public will never get to know everything that these organisations do, otherwise they won't be intelligence and spy organisations. It cannot be open book, but it can be transparent to the extent that we as a nation have confidence that they're doing what they have to do within the law, and that law has been openly debated, and we've got basically what we want is a protection of our freedom, a compromise in some things we have to get to give away. Restriction of freedoms, well, that's already been covered. Most of us in this room have done that already. You do it every day with use of Facebook, Twitter, any media, social media, with use of your credit card, with your one card, you know. I mean, why do Countdown send me a little note saying that Radler beer is on a special this week, Bruce? They know that because I bought it there last week or week before, so they are using that information, which annoys me a wee bit because I actually like other beers too. So we've got to be a bit mindful that we are already there. Someone asked about encryption, and you can keep encrypting and encrypting. Yes, that's it. But there's a whole industry worldwide in that. Encrypt, and then there are organisations who then try to decode. It's been going on way before most of us were born, and will continue to go on. And I don't know whether a code has ever been made or built or will be built that is totally unbreakable. All codes are breakable if you can have enough resource, enough computing power, and enough reason to do it. So you can go down that path. It creates another industry. It already has. It's out there. So would it impede GCSB? No, we just need a bigger budget. But and I don't think we need that either. Neutrality, the doctor mentioned that. That's a bad idea for New Zealand, particularly from my background, because that would mean the government has to put more money into the military, because all neutral, Sweden, Switzerland, spend infinitely more of their GDP on military than New Zealand does. Well, a good idea for a military person, but it's never going to be a goer because it would require extra money to go into that, and not only in the military. Is the Act out of date already? Well, we always have to bear in mind that. The 2003 Act is well out of date. Back in 2003, most of us hadn't even, well, probably some of you had, but certainly people like me had not thought of where we'd be in 2013. It just wasn't a viable thought process. So we have to be careful. Whatever act we put in place is not going to go out of date tomorrow. It will go out of date, but we have to have areas in it where it can be monitored. And again, most of that will be in how we have the surveillance of the intelligence organisations. What sort of overwatch we put in place to make certain we do not make it out of date. And I do like the idea of judges, not retired judges, current judges. They're pretty busy as it is, but they are impartial, they are apolitical. They're not like the American system and appointed politically. I quite like that idea. A rethink of friends and the Five Eyes. Five Eyes aren't the only friends we've got. We've got loads of friends around the place, and the view that the Americans might not like us working with the Chinese or any other of those combinations. In my time, that hasn't been an issue. The Five Eyes is a very, very good, friendly group where we each understand each other's restrictions and concerns with respect to sensitivities about where we might or might not go. But the Five Eyes is by far not the only arrangement we're in. It would be naive to think that we aren't thinking about Asia, we aren't talking with Asia, we aren't talking with Europe. It's a global community. Don't concentrate just on the Five Eyes. That's the longest one and the oldest one, but certainly not the only one by a long shot. Threats to national security, a good point. What is national security? I used to go to staff colleges and things like that when we could debate that, and in the good old days of the Cold War, it was actually quite clear-cut, relatively so. It certainly isn't now. National security, I wouldn't like to define it very simply. I couldn't. Is it economic? Is it national? Is it border security? I don't know. I know that potentially the most realistic threat to us in the future is going to be via the cyber means. I can't see any country wanting to put resources into taking us over. That notion went out about 1942 at the Battle of the Coral Sea, quite frankly. Cyber is where we need to be. And need to be up with the best players in that if we have to protect ourselves. We are very vulnerable to industrial or economic espionage. I think was the doctor made a point about, well, going back to we all give away our own intelligence without even realising it, our own privacy. Years ago, I was told that if I want to find out what's going on in Wellington, the best place to go is join the Choral Club, get there on a Thursday night or a Friday night, and sit there and take it all in. Book a late flight so you can be there for 2 or 3 hours, because you have a whole raft of politicians, businessmen coming through, most of whom are so important they must talk to either the person next door or very loudly to the phone to the people on the meeting that they had to leave to go to catch the flight to Auckland. And that was given to me very seriously. And having had that, and I've been many times, I'm no longer a member of the Choral Club, but sitting in there I think, by God, he's right. You can hear all sorts of things. But anyway, that's it. I think, certainly from my point of view, this has been a very worthwhile debate, conversation. But my final point is that we really need to be certain that we get this bill not rushed, but we get it enacted with all parties not necessarily agreeing, but at least having had an open debate, and we can then see the transparency of where it's going and that we do have effective overwatch on what our organisations are doing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sir Bruce. Michael.
I'm going to respond to Susan Chalmers and Laurence Wigg's questions really only because they're both on Apple laptops. And in cursive, breaches of their civil liberties are perfectly fine because we don't give a bugger about Apple users. But for us PC users, those sort of things are terribly important. And one other facet too, and this picks up Sir Bruce's points about the commercial side of it, let's not forget, and one of the questioner's points, let's not forget about big data and what's happening out there commercially. It is incredibly intrusive. Having said that, some of it's perfectly fine. So when Susan and Laurence dial up to Expedia or whatever, and they get a price comparison, their prices, of course, are higher than mine because they're rich buggers. I'm a poor guy, but of course it makes them cheaper for me. So thank you both of you for doing that. But anyway, Susan's point was about judges, and yes, I agree, it'd be better to have judges. I accept that it's not necessarily black and white. There are some political issues here. It is difficult. Sometimes the decisions should be jointly made, as they are now by in relation to some warrants issued by the Commissioner of Security Warrants, who's a retired High Court judge, and also the Minister. Others, they should be done totally by the judge or some other judicial officer. So yes, the best approach. Ironically, this will enable, I think, the spies, the GCSB, SIS, to do their job better as we as the public get more confidence. So there couldn't be anything better than to have a robust system. On Lance's point about, what about the Google glasses and the rest of it that's coming down the track? Yes, of course, the legislation has to be technology neutral, to use the buzzwords. It has to be ready for new intrusions, new ways of dealing with things. And unfortunately, that means that therefore the legislation needs to be quite broad in its approach. It cannot be prescriptive. And that means that it's difficult or will lead to uncertainties in interpretation, hence the need for more monitoring.
It's very good. Thank you all for your comments. I'm going to do some final summing up here. I'm going to go. Are these mics on as well? Well, I hope you'll agree with me that I was saying, are we going to have heat or are we going to have light? A little bit of heat and a lot of light. And I think that's a very good recipe for illumination. The consensus definitely seems to be that